Hello, good evening, and welcome to our virtual open house. The Zeppelin Museum launched the first Debatorial, an online discourse platform, more than a year ago. The Debatorial was created as our digital prologue, the first stage to our exhibition project Beyond States, the Boundaries of Statehood, which we were finally able to open on 4th February of this year. Since then, and even more before, we held numerous talks with experts from a wide field of expertise and artists. We organized discussions, interviews, and podcasts. You can revisit all of these on the Debatorial website or on our media library on zeppelin-museum.de. The museum, however, is of course open to the public as well. Until the end of the exhibition on 7th November, you will be able to listen to a lecture by curator Jürgen Bleibler next Thursday, 21st of October, 7 p.m. This event will take place at the museum. On Sunday, 7th November at 3 p.m., the curators Jürgen Bleibler and Ina Nettermeier will do a joint tour through the exhibition before we will round up our project with an online event organized in cooperation with the University of Constance. Here, we will look at the relationship between the state and the public in an online discussion on YouTube, Facebook, and the Debatorial website. It will start at 6 p.m. Please visit our website for more information on these events. We're looking forward to seeing you in person as well, so please don't hesitate. It's safe. The exhibition, Beyond States, the Boundaries of Statehood, reflects on the three constituting factors of a state: state territory, state citizenship, and state authority. State territory is thereby defined by land, sea, and air borders. In the last talks, we have looked at the technical, historical aspects of state territory and borders by reflecting on air borders and airspace. In this context, we have spoken about border crossings, both intentional and accidental. For example, Jürgen Bleibler focused on the so-called Lunéville incident, during which a German airship accidentally crossed over into French territory. In the online assembly Above Borders, experts from the museum have broached the issue of border crossings for propaganda purposes, while external experts spoke about current aerial surveillance. Just 2 weeks ago, Jan Behrendt looked at surveillance during the Cold War. Today's talk is a continuation of this particular aspect of the exhibition. Marie Flood, Mediation, and Torsten Niersen, director of the Museum Collections Unit, both from the Flygvapenmuseum, Swedish Air Force Museum in Linköping, are going to talk about the so-called Catalina Affair. During this event in 1952, an unarmed Swedish aircraft was shot down, resulting in 8 people being killed. Today, the wreck of the recovery aircraft is one of the centerpieces in the Flygvapenmuseum's Cold War exhibition and a conservation challenge. Before introducing our speakers, I would like to give one last heads up to the community. Please comment and ask questions on the platform you are currently watching this talk on, may it be the Debatorial website, Facebook, YouTube, or in our Telegram group. You can also write us an email via debatorial@zeppelin-museum.de. We'll pause on your questions. Sie können natürlich auch auf Deutsch Fragen stellen. Wir werden Ihre Fragen dann übersetzen. Well, let me introduce today's speakers then. A warm welcome to Marie and Thorsten. Good evening. Thank you so much for agreeing to this talk. Marie Flood is an educator and former high school teacher in history and Swedish. She always had a dream to work in a museum with the objects of history instead of only talking about them. Marie loves to meet the school children and discuss the Cold War, the neutrality of Sweden, and how they prepared for the Third World War. Thorsten Niersen is the director of the Museum Collections Unit at Flygvapenmuseum. He worked with industrial heritage for the last 27 years. Torsten studied ethnology and history at Umeå University. He loves airplanes and all the histories that objects can tell. We are very much looking forward to your presentation. Marie, Torsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having us. And we're standing here at the Air Force Museum down in the basement. And I would say we will tell the story why we're standing here, down here, Marie.
Yes, the Flygvapenmuseum in Sweden is located in Linköping, and it's about 200 kilometers south of Stockholm. Post-corona, we have about 240,000 visitors a year, to the museum and our facilities. 30% of them are children under 18. So now you're watching our latest happening for the children. It's our new playground. We opened it this summer. And now in November, we will reopening our science center with simulators and interactive stations and about air, aviation, and aerodynamics, of course.
My turn.
Yes.
Whoa. Please, I listened to the introduction and it said I love airplanes, and yes, I do. And please tell me if I get too nerdy, because you will hear a little bit about airplanes in this talk. But a little bit more about the Swedish Air Force Museum. We are a culture history museum. We used to be a place where they parked airplanes and helicopters, but now we are a culture history museum. We are owned by the Swedish state, and we get the foundings from the Ministry of Culture. And we have an enormous collection.
This is our last.
Yeah, the thing you see on the picture is a helicopter. We have lovely ways of naming our helicopters in Sweden. They are called helicopter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you wait to 9. 9 was a German one, and 10, 11, 14, 15, 16. This is number 10. And you can see the landscape. It's not Sweden. It's much warmer. This is one of the helicopters who served in Afghanistan. And our collection also contains about 100,000 museum objects. I will tell you the answer in a couple of years, because we are very hard working with our collections right now. 21,000 books in a lovely library. So you want to press that button all the time. Yeah, a little speedy. Yes, I love airplanes. And this is a picture with all the airplanes we have in our collection, 243 ones. And why do we have 243 airplanes? Yes, because they're military airplanes, and it's only 3 parts that can own a military airplane. It's the people who build it, the people who use it, or the state-owned museum, and that's us. That's why we have 243. And you have already began asking in the columns, why are they in different colors? Yeah, the red ones, we have more than one. The black and the blue, we have only one. And the blue, you know it.
Yeah, we the only example in the world.
Yeah, they are world unique.
Yes.
And that was the advertising. So now we start talking about the Catalina Affair. And
a short summary. We will talk about why Sweden used signals intelligence, and we talk about the 2 Swedish airplanes that actually was shut down in peacetime over international water, and the search for the wreck, and of course the exhibition and the conservation of the wreck.
But we will begin the story a little bit after the Second World War in 1946. People started seeing rockets in Sweden and northern Finland. Nobody knew where they came from, what they were doing, and some even said it was not rockets. And it was more than 2,000 sightings of rockets over northern Sweden and North Finland. And of course, people got afraid. They knew what rockets could do during the Second World War, and they even knew what rockets could do after the Second World War. So what happened? That was the first thing that happened, 1946. In 1948, Sweden got a very good airplane. It's a Spitfire. It's a reconnaissance aircraft. You can see on the fuselage, it's a small window. Yeah, you can point it. Wow. It's one place where they have their cameras. And these aircrafts, they could fly very fast, they could fly very high, and they could take amazing pictures. So what they used this Spitfire was taking pictures of most of the harbors in the Baltic Sea. You can see in the picture all the harbors that the Swedish Air Force took pictures from. And why did they do that? Just to prepare for something that could come. And one of the reconnaissance flights was made in 1949. Why did they do this flight very long into Soviet territorium? Yes, it was 2 Gulag prisoners who escaped from the Gulag, and they traveled through Finland and to Sweden and came in contact with the armed forces in Sweden. And they told about a big construction site at that city, which yeah, and it's south of Murmansk. And was it an airbase? Was it a launch ramp for rockets? Nobody knew, but we had to find out. The armed forces thought. So they sent away one single Spitfire. You can see in the picture they removed the 3 crowns on the wings, and the pilot was flying in a civil clothes. That was one part of the beginning, the recognition flights. And then came radar. No, radar came during the Second World War, but it came to Sweden after the Second World War. And this is actually a picture of the radar site at the Air Force base where this museum is located at Malmen. F3 is it's called. And they had a swimming pool and what do you call it, trampolines, and on the top of the thing they put the radar, so they combined everything. And what is radar? The radar stands for radio detection and ranging. So radar makes you see things on a big distance. You can see airplanes, you can see boats, you can see weather, you can see pretty much with radar. And radar is used during war, for instance. And how do you detect a radar? You have to do something called signal intelligence, and the acronym is SIGINT. It's an intelligence gathering by interception of signals, whether communications or radar. A radar sends a signal, and actually, weren't we supposed to hear a signal now? Yes, he's saying yes. It's a very quiet radar. Or maybe it's coming.
No, we don't think you hear it. No, okay.
And as you understand, signal intelligence is a very complicated business. Sometimes you don't hear anything, and sometimes you can hear it very loud. So we take next picture. Why did Sweden? No. Back. Why did Sweden gather signal intelligence, and why did the rest of the world do it as well? Yeah, when you plan for a complicated situation, you need to know what the other side is doing. And one thing you have to be sure of is where they have their radar stations, so you can avoid them if you're going to attack them. And that's pretty much what signal intelligence is about. Find the radars and listen to people talking to each other. Now you can change. Is signal intelligence dangerous? Yes, in a way, because you use airplanes, but you can also use boats, you can use stations on ground, but the tricky thing is the flying thing, airplanes. Did Soviet like signal intelligence? No. And nobody likes it. Nobody wants to be listened to when you do secret things. When you tell a secret to your friend, you don't want anyone to listen. No, everybody says so. The Soviet authorities were thinking, what can we do about this? We have to send a message, and they started sending the first message really in the beginning of 1950. They took the decision that it was allowed to open fire on foreign aircrafts if they were entering Soviet airspace. How is it called, airspace? That was in April, and just a couple of months later, they shot down this aircraft, not the actual one on the picture, but the type, which was an American signal intelligence aircraft. And all the crew on board, 9 people died. And it was in 1950. And the same year, we got this awesome airplane, a TP-79, we call it in Swedish. I guess all of you say it's a DC-3, but it's not. It's a TP-79 or a C-47 or a Skytrain or a Douglas Dakota. It's a very loved airplane, so it has many names. And Sweden used 2 of these aircrafts for signal intelligence, and they were named after the ovens, you know, the old god Odin, the one with one eye. He had 2 ravens, which mostly they sat on his shoulders, but they were also flying around, checking everything and controlling everything and reporting back to Odin. And the airplanes were named after these ravens. And Odin was very worried that one day the ravens wouldn't return.
And this is actually the only picture we have.
Yeah, and it's so cool. You can see the airplane, you can see all the things on the fuselage, and you can even see in the bottom left of the picture, you can see the one of the Spitfires from F11. F11. That was Swedish.
Yes.
Elf in German, I think. This is a model of the TP-79. The interior, you can see a very cramped workstations, and they were 5 operators. Yes.
And we actually don't know if it looks like this. This is a reconstruction because we don't have any pictures of it. Or so we know. So this is actually what we think it looked like after we found it.
This is my final picture before it's you. I know, sorry. No, you can see a red line in the picture, and that's, imagine you're flying there, and at point A, you could hear a radar, and every radar sounds different. It's a problem you didn't hear the radar, but if you heard the radar, you would know you heard it. And you can listen to it at point A, and then you move to point B, and you hear the same sound. And then you can triangulate, and you know the exact position of the radar. So that's one radar, you know, that is there, and maybe it won't move. And you can keep track on it, and that was what they were doing. And how far could they listen? I made these blue lines 200 kilometers, but they could listen up to 500 kilometers, and depending on the altitude of the aircraft and what they were listening to. That's pretty much signal intelligence and a little bit aircrafts. So
yeah, so I will talk about the last mission of the TP-79. TP stands for transportation airplane, for you who's not so nerdy as Torsten. This is the crew of this last mission. So June 13, 1952, these 8 men entered the DC-3 on what they thought was an ordinary trip. They were used to flight this flight. It was the 52nd flight in a year, not only with this crew, but they have been flying very much. It was a top secret mission. It was the crew and the other crew on Mugen, who knew, and some people over them. Not even their wives should know about it. They were 5 civilists. They worked for, in Swedish, called FRA. It's in English, National Defense Radio Establishment. They were the telegraphists and the signalists. They were listening for different sounds. And then we have the Air Force crew. And down to your right is the pilot, Alvar Elmerberg. Sometimes there actually could be a 9th member because they were pilots training to fly the DC-3. But this day was, as I told you, an ordinary day at work. The start, however, was delayed because of bad weather. So at 9:05 in the morning, they started from Bromma Airport in Stockholm. Every 20 minutes, they reported back their location in code because they have had an actual flight route and an coded flight route. And they were heading south down the Baltic Sea in what's called the middle. So they won't be in Swedish air territory or in Soviet air territory. So this is a picture of the last mission and the route. It was called Route 9, and it was actually the same route almost every time, according to the weather, of course. So they flew south, and in the south, they took 2 turns to listen to a new radio station in, pardon for the pronunciation, in Liepaja. It's down here. So they tried to straight up the airplane to actually take better signals, so that it will be more craft to it. So they did that at 2 times. This actually the Russians knew, but at 10:24 they reported back that we are going home, and almost at that exact same time the Russian airplanes took off from Tukums in today's Latvia. And at 11:14 the Soviet pilot Oshivsky reported that he could see the plane. He had actually got the order to shoot it down. And 11:23, he actually attacks. And at the same time, there's been an interrupted radio call from the plane. They tried to call back, but there was no answer. The MiG-15 did 2 attacks, and grenade shades from the 35 millimeters hit the oil tank of the left wing and started a big fire. The pilot, Alvar Elmerberg, we think he probably tried to dive into the clouds to avoid the hunt and tried to do a forced landing on the water. But due to the weather, it was a hard landing. The Russian pilot reported back in code that the plane has been shot. And then he also said, I saw a parachute. 11:28, the airplane hits the water. And we know that because the watch in the cabin actually stopped at that time. So there was an immediately search after the plane. 45 minutes later, we had a Catalina out in the air searching for the crew, hoping they were in lifeboats, because June in the Baltic Sea, it could be real cold and they might only live for a few hours. They only found, 2 days later, they found this lifeboat, as we see, with grenade shades. It was unpacked and it was found 20 kilometers north of the actual site they thought it had crashed. This led to a search area further northeast.
And that's 2 days after the first shooting, and they did it again. The Soviet fighters shot down one of the unarmed rescue Catalinas. over the Baltic Sea. And yes, I said I was a little bit plain nerdy, so we take this then. It's called the TP-47, or maybe a Kanso, because it's Catalina built in Canada, and they are called Kanso. This airplane served during the Second World War in the Atlantic, in northern Atlantic Sea. And this is actually a picture of the one who was shot down. It has a 02 on the rudders. And they also did a forced landing, but they were lucky. They forced landed close to a West German freighter, Münsterland. And this iconic picture is taken from the deck of the freighter. And it's probably what saved them, because imagine what the fighter plane could do with people in lifeboats. Yeah. And one thing a little bit funny in this afterwards is that we had the chief of the Swedish Air Force. What did he do when he heard that the DC-3 was shot down? He ran to his own airplane and he went out searching for the aircraft out in the Baltic Sea. So we had our chief of the Swedish Air Force out alone in his
unarmed
airplane.
Yeah.
He didn't find it either.
And what happened then? Actually, the Swedes, of course, asked the Russians if they had shot down the plane.
The Soviets.
The Soviets. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Because of the lifeboat they found, they really thought they come to the conclusion that it was shot down. The Soviets said, no, we don't know. We saw 2 planes heading back to Sweden, but we didn't shoot down anything. Sweden actually was the government had tried really hard to press the Soviets, but they didn't answer all the questions. This resulted in that Sweden did a book called the Blue Book with all the notes, all the correspondence between Sweden's government and the Soviets. This Blue Book should be to use in the UN, because the government in Sweden was thinking that we must take this to the UN. It didn't happen because the Catalina Affair, the Catalina, was more interesting to talk about than the DC-3, because their media was involved from the beginning. We had eyewitnesses and survivors. So what happens then? With a family in Sweden in the 50s, when the father almost suddenly disappears. Well, in the 50s in Sweden, we had the most households were with the housewife, because the husband's salary could support all the family. They didn't know what happened. They got informed the same day, Friday the 13th, but they didn't know for over 40 years what actually happened, or 50 years actually, what happened with their husbands and fathers. They never stopped trying to find out. They actually wrote articles in Swedish newspapers, but got refused by the Swedish government. So they really tried to shut it down, this DC-3 affair. So maybe it should be called the DC-3 affair, because that's where we don't know anything at this point. So should the wives be treated like widows, or how should they be threatened? They always asked and also wrote. Roger Elmerberg is the son of the pilot, and in the early 80s he wrote a book about the flyer who disappeared. And then the debate started again. What really happened? And this led to that the Swedish government did another commission where they, for the first time, said that this was a signal intelligence air force. For 30 years, they didn't said anything about it. It was a navigation practice. So finally, the wives knew a little bit about what they were doing. But in this commission report, nothing news about the crew or the plane.
So it was not until 1991 that the Russian officially announced that the plane had been shot down by a Soviet MiG-15 fighter. The Russian publication approved by President Boris Yeltsin, it was stated that the DC-3 did not violate Soviet territory.
Yes.
And at that same day, the 13th of June 1952, also another aircraft was shot down in the other end of the world, over the Japanese Sea. It was a B-29 signal intelligence aircraft. So maybe the Soviet authorities wanted to say that they had enough of signal intelligence for a while, because two aircrafts were shot down at the same day. And where was the wreck? In 1998, a Swedish diver and former Air Force pilot Anders Jalaj became interested in this thing and started a new round of interviews and started searching for the wreck. And they could also use this new side scan sonar technique to look over big areas of the ground, the bottom ground. In 2003, 5 years later, they found the wreck at 125 meters deep. And it was on international waters, but in Swedish economic zone. Later that summer, they also found the TP-47, the Kanso, the Catalina. And they started diving at the site, the Swedish Navy. They used this submarine aircraft to the right in the picture. It's a Mantis submarine. And they treated this crash like a forensic investigation. So first they salvaged the wings, and after that they froze the sea bottom. They made it like ice, so they could lift the whole bottom up to the surface. And in that technique, they could take the bottom into the hangar and work through it and find all the parts, missing parts from the aircraft. No. And all the wreck was moved to a Navy base outside Stockholm, where they sort of tried to put the wreck together and tried to find out what had happened. And they also made this technical investigation about what happened to the airframe and the people inside. And this, of course, took many years, but it also led to the new Swedish Air Force Museum, I would say. On the picture to the left, you see all the black buildings are the new buildings which were built to open in 2010. And we also made this exhibition. So we're standing right now outside the wreck of the DC-3. We have it behind us here. And we kind of built a new museum, a more storytelling museum.
And not only storage of airplane.
But airplanes are nice.
Yes. Of course, but they also can tell the story.
And it was a very costly operation, getting the wreck up from the seabed, but also the treatment afterwards and the transport. Here you see a picture of the fuselage and the wings being transported with boat from Stockholm to Norrköping, and after that there was a lorry transport to Linköping.
And here we can see it when we put it down.
Yeah.
Here in the monter behind us. And here it's so we actually put the plane down and then we build the walls and the rest of the museum on top of it.
And this is the wreck site of today. And of course, this is a big challenge for us as a museum to take care of this very large object. It's resting in a climate-controlled monter, and it will remain there for many years. We don't know how long. We will do everything we can do to preserve it and keep it like it is. But of course, there will be further deterioration in the wreck. But we're doing our best.
Yes, we are.
And we're also trying to tell this story in English.
So we just want to say thank you for listening to us, and we'll hope we see you in Linköping someday.
Of course. So thank you very much.
Well, I hope we can come one day to Linköping, for sure. So thank you, Maria and Torsten, for this great presentation. It was really great. Thank you so much. And I hope there will be a lot of questions from the community. But first, I would like to ask a question as a museum professional myself, because I'm also working in museum education. And I was wondering how you use the wreck of the plane in your museum education programs.
We actually have a school program called the Cold War and the DC-3, because over us we have an exhibition with that talks about the Cold War and the Swedish folk home, you can call it, a thought that in Sweden all should be equal and we should take care of each other. So we actually talks about Sweden after the Cold War, during the Cold War, after the Second World War, and how we rebuilt the industries and people moving back to moving to the cities and such. So this is actually a piece of that when we talk about when the Cold War actually was kind of hot in Sweden, and the students always think it's really cool to hear that we actually have been in a fight. Or it wasn't a fight because we weren't armed, but so we use this. It's a very popular. It's one of our most popular school programs.
And it's also the story about losing your husband and trying to
yes, of course,
live your life, not knowing anything. Because
we are standing here, it's not only a museum piece, it's also a tomb over the dead people, the remains of the dead people they actually found. There were 4 people, remainings of the 4 people they were found when we took the plane up. So this is actually a site we are really glad to have, but it's also, of course, a really emotional place to be.
A place which you treat with respect. And in international comparisons, this could look a little bit strange. We build a big museum, part of our museum around 8 people, and many other countries have suffered thousands and millions of lives during wartime. I really don't have a good answer on that, but it's the way we done it, and Sweden has lived in peace for 200 years, so yeah, I guess it's something of an explanation, I would say.
Thank you very much. I was also wondering, what I found really interesting is that you told the story that at the same day there was another airplane shot down over the Japanese Sea. So at the time, did people make connections between these two airplanes that were shot down at the same day?
No, they really didn't, because it's something, the world is big, and the authorities don't want us to talk about these things, and it's something we learned during studying the history of these events. And there's also one interesting question: do we do signal intelligence today? Yes, we do, and everybody does. And it's also not only airplanes and from ships. We also monitor internet these days. So it's a way to move the signal intelligence to somewhere else, another arena.
That's very true. Thank you. You also mentioned this briefly, but I'm going to ask again why it is actually called Catalina Affair if, well, the actual airplane is named something else.
Yeah, they should call it the Cancer Affair.
Yes, then no one knows what it is.
Yeah.
Actually, it was because the Swedish government, they didn't know what happened to the DC-3 either. So it was easier because they didn't find anything. They couldn't explain what happened. And then the media already was on the location with their own airplanes searching for the DC-3. So it actually was more on point, if you can say that, at the time. And you had the survivors, you had the eyewitnesses, and you had actually people told that this was the Soviets that shot at the Catalina. So that's why the government chose to talk about the Catalina instead of the DC-3, because it was easier for them to explain. So then the DC-3 kind of landed in the shadows instead.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, imagine you have two versions of a thing. You take the more nice one.
The most convenient for yourself, yeah.
And because, well, it was shot down by a Soviet aircraft, but was it actually over Soviet or in Soviet airspace? So did it actually enter, well, both, well, the first one, the DC?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
But there was always a discussion of where the Soviet border was, because they wanted to be further from the coastline than the international borders were. So the definition of the border is another discussion. But no, the first DC-3 weren't in Soviet airspace.
Airspace.
No.
Airspace.
And Catalina?
Not it was in the neutral zone.
Yeah.
But had Swedish airplanes been on Soviet areas? Yes, they had. The reconnaissance aircrafts did fly in very fast and dive in and dive back to avoid fighter planes. So yes, we did it before this, but the signal intelligence aircrafts, they never did, because they were slow airplanes and easy targets, unarmed.
But we have forgotten to say that Sweden wasn't the only country actually using signal intelligence over the Baltic Sea. Because of the international water, we had also British airplanes, American airplanes, some German airplanes to do this also. And we know that they did long flights over the Soviet land to take photos. So this was very common in the 1950s after the Second World War to actually survey they did it everyone did it. Yeah. Who could actually, who had the planes, of course, and the equipment.
Can I tell one thing about another object in our exhibition in our collections?
Go ahead, go ahead.
We have a really cool thing too. The Americans, they did a project in the 1950s beginning called Moby Dick, where they wanted to take, it's before Google Earth, they wanted pictures of the whole Soviet territory to see what they were doing inside this iron curtain. So they made balloons which could fly in the jet streams, and they passed from Turkey and Norway and UK over the Soviet landmass and landed on the other side. And they were supposed to take pictures all the way over the Soviet. And we actually have one of these, not the balloon, but the thing, the camera thing under it. It crash landed on a frozen lake in Sweden, and that it was a farmer. He came to the police station. He was very upset because somebody had thrown a refrigerator on the lake, on the ice, but it wasn't a fridge. It was the camera thing, and I think Sweden has the most of these objects from that Moby Dick project. They have none in US.
Very cool, thank you. Our community actually is wondering at the moment how to understand Swedish neutrality if there was a case of surveillance and espionage in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, that's the tricky question, actually, because we were frightened of the Russian. We somehow thought that they might do to us what they did to the Eastern Europe. So somehow we wanted to prepare us for this not to happen. So we had to know stuff about the Soviet armed forces. So this was a way to do it. But we couldn't do it without help from the British and the Americans, because they had the equipment that we didn't have. So that's the thing about neutrality. You have to do it. It's a fine line to walk, actually.
Very true. Thank you.
You have to be street smart.
Thank you. I was also wondering, when the discussion came up again, so after the Soviet Union dissolved in the 1990s, was there also a discussion if the Catalina Affair, the shutdown of the DC-3, had been a human rights violation? Did they discuss it at the time?
No, I wouldn't say so.
No. I've never read before or heard that to talk about the human rights during this, because somehow they see it like a military thing instead of human rights, even though there were civilians on the airplane.
Okay, thank you. And I have one last question. So in our exhibition, we talk about airspace and air borders, but we also have a lot of laws in place that define air borders. But the DC-3 wasn't in Soviet territory, but was still shot down, in official Soviet territory. So can we say that the Catalina Affair is an example for how strong, the strong nations or the strong still rule the skies, despite all these laws we have in place to prevent it?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a simple answer. Yes, of course you can violate laws if you're strong.
That is very true. And especially because, as you said before, that nobody wanted to, admit to the things that happened at the time. Why do you think that the Soviet Union then disclosed that they actually shot down the plane after they dissolved?
I think people could reach the archives at that time, and it was more easy to access information. So we learned a lot.
And then the Soviet Union did not exist anymore. So what the Soviet Union did, Russia couldn't answer for. So therefore, they could say that we actually know the Soviet Union did it, we did not. And then we can rebuild the relations between the countries.
That's why I corrected you when you said Russia.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's so easy.
That's very true. I do actually have one last question. Because at the time when the incident happened, did other countries have any reaction?
It was rather common, actually, that planes were shot down because of the reconnaissance and everything. But of course, a Swedish aircraft was shot down. 2 Swedish aircrafts were shot down. So it was a reaction. But at the same day, an American airplane was shot down. So they really didn't care that much about ours. But yes, of course, especially in the area around us.
Okay.
And if you do something and nobody notices it, it's so easy to say, no, I wasn't me.
That's very true. Oh, well, I think this marks the end of our talk today. Thank you so much for listening to us, all of you out there, and thank you so much for the presentation and the Q&A session. I'm going to do one quick last thing in German, so don't be confused.
Thank you very much for having us.
Nächste Woche, jetzt muss ich selber nachgucken, am 21. Genau, nächste Woche spricht Jürgen Bleibler, also am 21. über die verdeckte deutsche Luftrüstung der 1920er Jahre am Beispiel Dornier. Der Vortrag findet vor Ort im Museum statt. Wir freuen uns auf Sie. Okay, well, for now, I wish you all a wonderful evening and see you then. Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.